Of the 2024 Interim Joint Committee on Education. I'm going to ask everyone to please silence your cell phones. We appreciate that courtesy. At this time, we're glad to have Rachel with us today. I'm going to ask Rachel to call the roll.
Senator Carroll, Senator Funky Frohmeyer, Senator Givens, Senator Higdon, Senator Meredith, Senator Neal, Senator Stivers, Senator Thomas, Senator Tishner, Senator Williams, Senator Wilson, Senator Wise,
Here.
Representative Baker, Representative Bauman, Representative Bojanowski, Representative Brown,
Here.
Representative Callaway,
Present.
or Emily Callaway, Representative Josh Callaway,
Present.
Representative Decker, Representative Doan,
Present.
Representative Jackson,
Present.
Representative Lewis, Representative Massaroni,
Present.
Representative McCool,
Here.
Representative Proctor, Representative Rayburn,
Here.
Representative Rawlings, Representative Raymond,
Here.
Representative Riley, Representative Timoney, Representative Truitt,
Here.
Representative Wilner,
Here.
Co-Chair West, and Co-Chair Tipton.
Chair is present. We do have a quorum. I just want to introduce my co-chair, Senator West, the Senate Chair of Education. He said he didn't have anything at this time, so we'll march on. Any other members have any comments or guests they want to introduce at this time? Seeing none, do I need a motion to accept the minutes as they were presented? Do I have a motion? Have a motion and a second by Representative Jackson. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed, no. Motion carries. I want to remind all the presenters we have a full agenda today, so we'll try and be as concise as possible. You need to turn your microphones on, introduce yourself for the record. After that, I will administer the oath to all of our guests. And then just make sure that microphone is pulled closely to you when you turn that green light on. So at this time, we'll go for our first agenda item, the assessment and accountability data, which was made public on October the 3rd. I'd asked Commissioner Fletcher and the representatives from KDE to come forward and update us on what this data says and what it tells us going forward. Commissioner Fletcher, please, you and your colleagues, please introduce yourself for the record, and then I'll administer the oath.
Thank you, Chair Tipton. Dr. Robbie Fletcher, Commissioner of Education.
Dr. Jennifer Stafford, Division Director in the Office of Assessment and Accountability.
Associate Commissioner Rhonda Sims, Office of Assessment and Accountability.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you so much. Commissioner Fletcher, just you all please proceed. Whoever's going to go first, and welcome again to the Interim Joint Committee on Education.
Thank you, Chair Tipton. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. And as you see, I'm on the agenda twice. I'll start off talking about accountability and assessment. And then also, too, I have some great data I want to share with you about our educator. I know it says great data. It's better data about educator shortage. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But for this part, as Representative Tipton pointed out, we did have our state data release on October 3rd. And let's see. There we go. And that was released publicly, but one of the things that I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with, that we get data, individual student data, out much more quickly to districts. It's still in the fall. It still follows the summer session, but every single district had individual student data. Usually that's around August 1st or 2nd. This year it happened to be on August 2nd. And we get that data out to districts so they can start making some decisions early on. So when you look at ratings, when you look at color ratings, those type of items, and you're looking at public release, that happens around October. We were about a month earlier this year than we were in previous years. But when we look at individual data, you get that, our districts get that much earlier. Also, too, we do KSA released items, which you'll see there. That comes out in September. And the other item, just to make sure that all of our legislators are aware, and I'm sure that you are, but I'll rehash that for you anyway. This accountability system really started in 2022, and there is two major components overall. One is status and one is change. With status, you have to have 2 years of data before you can really incorporate change. So the accountability for 2024 is comparable to 2023. Then 2023, we use that data for change compared to 2022. And then, as you know, as changes in the accountability system, we've over the past decade and a half, we've had different types of systems. Whether we do labels, whether it be stars, 5-star schools, something of that nature. Then, of course, now we have red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. With typically, we tried I was a member of the standard setting committee. What we shot for there was, when you talk about red schools, you're talking about those CSI 5% schools is what was the standard there. The other point I'll make before turning over to these ladies that will talk a lot about the accountability system overview and actually the results is one of the major things that's a part of this accountability system, again, is change. That's not individual student growth. So when you look at change, you're talking about cohorts of students from one year to the next, and that is in statute. And so we do adhere to that change concept. Now, one of the items that we talk a lot about too is student growth, and actually Representative McCool and I talked about student growth here recently too. Where do you get the individual student where you take them? So again, just remember that it's not based on individual student growth. The change component is taking cohorts of students from this year compared to last year. So with that being said, I'll turn it over, I think, to our associate commissioner. Who's going first?
I am.
Okay. Then Director Jennifer Stafford.
Thank you. As a reminder, this is the second full year of implementation of the
Jennifer, could you pull that microphone just
Sure.
a little bit closer to you? Thank you.
Thank you. Apologize. As a reminder, this is the second full year of administration and implementation of the accountability system that was passed by legislation in 2020. That legislation was passed. We went into, obviously, the pandemic, and there was no testing in 2020, limited testing in 2021. So the first year we were able to have this begin was 2022. That was the first year for status, so we were able to have status for 2022 only, and then we went into 2023 with status and change because we needed, again, those 2 years of status to be able to have and implement the change. So 2024 has the second year of change. So we had second full year of implementation. So looking at what's required, we have within our accountability system, we have two purposes. We have to meet state regulation and statutes as well as federal statutes. For the Every Student Succeeds Act, there are 3 reporting categories that we must identify schools for, and that's comprehensive support and improvement. That is schools that are the lowest 5%, or they have high schools that are below 80%. Now, we did not have any schools that were below 80%, so we had 5% of schools by level, elementary, middle, and high schools, that meet that bottom 5%. So the schools are in order, they're rank ordered, and then we start from the bottom and go up 5%, and those are the schools, again, by level that are identified for CSI. We also, once we get that cut at 5%, we have to identify schools that are targeted support and improvement. And those are the schools that have individual student demographic groups performing as low as that bottom 5%. And the final category we have to identify for federal reporting is an additional targeted support and improvement, which we did not have any meet that criteria this year. For our state legislation, we have multiple levels of reporting that include both the status score and the change score. The status is reported on each indicator, and there's an exclusive list of indicators in the statute, and those indicators are reported by levels of status from very high to very low. And then for change, that's also by indicator that is reported as increased significantly through decreased significantly. So those indicators are all pulled together, and each indicator then has a color rating, and then all of the indicators come together for an overall performance, which is, again, reported as a color rating as well. So that's a combined indicator, combined all those indicators to an overall, and then is reported. Federal classifications, again, we had TSI is required annually, and based on legislation that is identified for 3 consecutive years. So the school would have had to be in TSI previously to be identified this year. We did not identify any new CSI schools, that's the Comprehensive Support and Improvement, this year. Only the schools that are continued to meet those criteria of CSI are identified. The next identification will be in 2025. So, however, the schools that did meet the criteria for exiting both of those 2 federal classifications were exited. And I will note the good news is that we had 8 schools that were previously identified as CSI did exit, and we had 88 schools that improved their individual student groups and exited TSI. So that's noteworthy and worthy of praise for our schools. Here we can see the federal classifications, a total overall by level. You can see the total number of schools identified for CSI was 20, down from the 28 that was identified last year. And for our TSI schools, Targeted Support and Improvement, you can see the reduction of the number of schools identified for TSI. The overall, again, performance combines all of those indicators and by level, and is reported by the color rating on the eventually be a dashboard. Now, we have had a new vendor. We've gone through a process of procuring a new school report card vendor this year. In lieu of having that dashboard that is not available yet, we went ahead and released data on October 3rd through a platform called Open House in spreadsheets. So in the spreadsheets, it would have the word of the color. So it would say blue or green. The dashboard is being developed and will be released hopefully within the next couple of months. The overall rating and performance that will be on that dashboard, you can see here the differences in the color ratings for our elementary, middle, and high schools from one year to the next. And these are the places that can be compared in accountability, because these 2 years that are displayed on this table and the next table does include status and change, both for 23 and 24. And this is a district look. Again, you can see that the differences between our performance of our schools from one year to the next, with both status and change in it. Again, we are preparing for the school report card release, and it will look and feel much like it did last year, with the dials on each of the pages for the schools, and we'll be able to see very quickly the overall performance and then the levels of performance for the status and change. So at that point, I'll turn it over to Rhonda. for assessment.
Thank you, Jennifer. I want to talk a bit about assessment results with you. And we're going to look we're going to begin with the state required assessment, the Kentucky Summative Assessment. Then we're going to share data that we have with the College Admissions Assessment, which is the ACT in Kentucky. And then we want to give you a picture of comparison and talk with you a little bit about the National Assessment, or NAEP. And we'll kind of update that data as we go along here. So as we move, we have used the same format, Chair Tipton, that we've used in the past. So we've sort of added to the data each year. So those of you who were here last year, you'll recognize this format. Obviously, you may have questions, and we can certainly try to respond to those if they're not on these data slides. In general, when we look at reading and mathematics, and you can see the columns represent elementary, middle, and high schools, and we do have what's called we have a level-based system. So we do compare elementaries to elementaries and middle to middle and high to high, especially when we generate that bottom 5% federally. So looking at the columns across, you will also see that we share earlier data from 18 and 19, but we've also made note there that we had the no testing with the COVID experience, as well as limited participating in 20 and 21 that Dr. Stafford mentioned to you a few minutes ago. Looking on the bottom row of 2024, the statement I think I would make overall for reading and mathematics is that in reading and math, we either had a maintenance of the same performance as last year, or we had a rise. And so you'll also note some little subscripts there for one. In those early years of 18 and 19, which really can't be directly compared, we were transitioning from end of course testing at the high school, so we were moving away and used the ACT very temporarily there in that thing. So you can see that around 47 to 45% our students are proficient and distinguished. Now, remember, those are the highest two levels, and proficiency is a challenging standard. So proficiency and the distinguished is the level above that. So 47 to 45% across reading and this year. As we look at mathematics, we can see we're a little bit lower than reading. Again, you have maintenance at elementary, a rise at middle, and at high school, a slight tick up as well. As we move to the next, we want to highlight for you that if you've read the press releases, science is an area where we are going to need to continue to kind of look deeply at both instruction and the assessment. Assessments tend to, you have a period of time you set at the standards for what identifies a student in a category. We use the terms novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished. And then when you make changes to the assessment, you need to revisit those standards and look at the assessment again. We're on track to field test new science items this year, and then we'll need to bring teachers together. I will remind you that for all of the assessment results that are state assessment results, these are developed with Kentucky teachers. That is a requirement that you placed in statute, and one we're very committed to. So we have Kentucky teachers involved in all parts of the process, from the development to setting the standards of what should students be able to do if we're going to put a label of novice, apprentice, proficient, distinguished. So science, you can see that at high school particularly, if we look at proficient and distinguished, we're below 10%, as a drop there from 10 last year to 6% this year. At elementary and middle, we see those are 34 and 22. So obviously when we want to look closely at that, we have already had some of our psychometric staff looking at just the assessments in general and all the psychometric principles that are used and are expected to be used federally for that assessment. But we'll continue to have some work moving forward. As we end today, we'll mention some activities that are ongoing to also support instruction as well. So I think we have to look at instruction, how our standards play out with the assessment. I will say that we've had our test independently aligned so that we can say that our assessment does match our state standards, and we do have challenging standards for all of our content areas. So as we move to the final areas we'll point out is social studies and writing. We've used in the past with you writing on demand. We also report an editing mechanics score and a combined score. but we have used writing on demand in the past so that we stayed to that pattern with you today. As we look at social studies to begin with, you can see that we had a slight decrease at elementary, but an increase at middle and high school, and those high as 2% ranges. And then with writing on demand, we had maintenance, same level at elementary, and an increase at middle and an increase at high school. And so, again, those slight tweaks up. If we move forward to the ACT, this is not truly a national comparison, but it is looking at Kentucky outside a little bit of other areas. There will be a fairly recent what's called a graduation report released by ACT, which compares graduates of the ACT. You may see that in the media. I want to make sure you understand the data you're looking at here are juniors. So these are students that are juniors in Kentucky. Kentucky does offer the ACT to all juniors in the state of Kentucky. We have a population of approximately 1% of students that have an alternate assessment experience instead of the ACT. The ACT composite, we've given you 5 years of data, I believe, here. And you do see a slight decline in the overall composite that puts together the content areas. At 18.2 is where we are in the 23-24 data release. So students would have taken this assessment basically in March of 24 is when the administration would have occurred. You can see the pattern there as well. Now with content area scores, the ACT currently offers English, math, reading, and science. So we have given you a table to sort of see the look across time with trend, and then you also see it in the lines as well. Our highest performing content area in Kentucky is reading, followed by science, mathematics, and English. Now, we'll point out that the science assessment for the ACT is different than the content-based science assessment that we have with the Kentucky Summative Assessment. It is more a science reasoning assessment with the ACT. As we're looking at those numbers, we also want to point out that Kentucky also has benchmarks that are established by the Council on Post-Secondary Education that are used many times in college admission. And so this is a percentage of students in Kentucky that are meeting the CPE benchmarks. And again, here our highest benchmark meeting is English, which is the blue line at the top, then followed by reading, and then mathematics at 29.7% with math. The number that you need to meet the benchmark that is established through a process by CPE, English is needed 18, is needed 19 in mathematics, and reading at 20, and that's on a scale up to 36. So this is to just give you a sense of where we are with those CPE benchmarks. Finally, I want to close with what we have as most recent data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Now, we do expect that there will be a data release in early 2025 for the most recent NAEP assessments, which were given in 24. But this is what is available to this point and what we have seen as well, because we've not seen that early data either. Sometimes the National Assessment of Educational Progress is referred to as the nation's report card, because it really is the only measure that can be truly compared across every state in the country. It is done with a randomized sample. Not all students take the assessment. We do not report it out at district level information. It is a state look. And so we want to review for you reading and math, grades 4 and 8. And so the map, I think, gives you a nice look at where our rank is and the number of across the country. It gives you the Kentucky scale score. NAEP reports using a scale score, and then it gives you the national public scale score. You can see that looking at our map here that Kentucky is scoring roughly where 36 of the jurisdictions are scoring with NAEP. 7 are higher and 8 are lower. Now, if we look at this in just a little different view on the next slide, we can see the trend, and we gave you a starting trend of 98, and I will remind you, this is something we shared with you last year if you were here, because it is, again, the most recent data that we have. but just to remind you if you weren't part of this conversation last year. When you look at a scale score of 218, and then you can see that's compared to the nation 213. So in 98, Kentucky was scoring above the nation at fourth grade reading. But in 22, we're sort of at the nation. You'll see an asterisk. If you see an asterisk, that means the difference is statistically significant, has been termed that with NAEP. And if there's no asterisk, it simply means it's not a statistical difference from the two scores. So you can see Kentucky is still with grade 4 reading slightly above the national average, but not as much as we were in the 90s. As we move to the next slide, this gives you a sense of how groups of students are performing with NAEP, and you can see the 22 column and the percent that is proficient above. I'll remind you, I should have mentioned this probably at the beginning, NAEP also has levels of student performance. So the terms that they use are a little similar to Kentucky's. They have what's called advanced is the highest level, followed by proficient, one step down. Then they have something called basic, and then students can be below basic. So they also have a 4-level sort of system of where students perform. So we're looking at those top 2 levels, again, at proficient and above, with reading at 4. If we, I'll just point out that the line you see that's much higher than others is a pattern we see in nearly all assessments that are standardized assessments that give disaggregated information. The highest performing students are Asian. And so that you will see that consistent pattern throughout the process. Our students that have more challenges are English learners, not unexpected. I know we've been working with Representative Jackson quite a bit on that conversation, and students with disabilities. Mathematics, grade 4 mathematics, Kentucky's rank is not as high. We're at 33 in terms of a ranking. You can see that Kentucky is at 234, which is slightly below the national public number of 235. So 22 jurisdictions are scoring about where Kentucky is, 17 are higher, and 12 are lower. And obviously, I think as this body, you've invested some energy in numeracy. So we would hope as we see results moving forward, we will see some improvement in that, just as you've now invested in literacy as well. So as we move to grade 4 math on the trend, this is again, you'll see the Kentucky is in the gold color and the nation is in the darker color. I think it appears black. You can see that Kentucky is slightly below, but also we have kind of closed where we are with the nation. Beginning on where we were. So with math grade 4, we're seeing some at least closing of that gap between national performance. We look at mathematics at grade 4. Again, this is the look that's disaggregated. So you can see that you kind of have the one group scoring well above and others are sort of clustered a bit after that. Reading, grade 8. Kentucky's rank is 33 with reading grade 8. And again, you can see that our public, we're slightly below the national public. And then as you look at those jurisdiction comparisons, similar to 33, at 9 higher, 9 lower than Kentucky on grade 8. As we look at reading at grade 8, you can see that we're slightly below in 22, the national 259 to 258. It's not an asterisk, so it's not considered statistically different with that difference of 1. Reading grade 8, again, we're looking at how Kentucky students are performing in groups. Now, you will notice here some broken lines. So I want to mention that to you. It meant that we did not have a large enough population to report. So as we look at the Asian line at the top, you can see we're looking at data in 2015, but we don't have data in 22. The same on our English learner line. We had data reported in 19 and 22, but not in all the years that were previous. So again, NAEP runs a sampling process, and that sample process is to match the demographics of the state, but occasionally then there will be too few students for that reporting to occur. As we look at grade 8 mathematics in terms of rank, Kentucky ranks at 40th. So here is an area where we obviously want to put some attention with grade 8. If you're looking at the national numbers, we are lower in rank. We are lower than the national public score, and you can see as we look at those comparisons of that little table, we have 25 districts, or not districts, jurisdictions that are scoring above Kentucky in grade 8 mathematics. So again, I think that focus on numeracy becomes an important piece. Again, looking just at how we compare, you can see the very similar pattern in the lines, but again, Kentucky scoring below the national look. And you can see the difference there. There was not a flag of significance in 22, but in 19 there was. Again, how our groups are performing, again, you'll see some not full lines, again, based on not enough population with Asian students and with our ELs there. We do have consistent data beginning in 2017. Now, obviously, all of this, as we've walked through the data, brings some areas that we need to continue to improve. There's some things to celebrate, some schools that have made improvements to leave the bottom 5 ranking and show improvement for CSI, fewer schools being identified as TSI, which reflects the group performance. We can see we're scoring sort of at the nation in some areas, and others we're not. We know we need to look deeper at science and say, how can we support instruction, and how can we support the standards and how they're being managed within the instruction, as well as looking at the assessment itself and revisiting the standards, which is a normal process for assessments. A couple of things we wanted to mention from our Office of Teaching and Learning under the content area supports. There continues to be focus on making sure that students have high quality instructional resources, really, that are on grade level and push those students above grade level a bit, but particularly on grade level. Access to highly qualified teachers and administrators, and you're going to hear more from Dr. Fletcher around our teacher vacancies issues. High quality professional development, and this is where you as a body have really invested your care, your thinking, your funding in programs like the letters training and that high quality professional development. We hear anecdotally that people feel that's making a real difference in student performance, but remember, it takes some time to see that show up in more state level assessment results. We have the numeracy counts, and I know we're getting activities with a new director in mathematics education at the department. So a lot of exciting things ahead. Obviously, teacher shortage and absenteeism continue to be issues that not only Kentucky grapples with, but the rest of the country as well. So I will pause at that point. That takes us to the end, and see if my colleagues here have anything they want to add, and then I'm sure you may have time that you would like some conversation with us directly.
Anything else to add at this time, Commissioner Fletcher?
The only thing, first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Stafford and Ms. Sims, Associate Commissioner Sims. They've done a great job of putting this presentation together. And as she pointed out, there are some areas for success, but there's areas for work. And one of the things that we sincerely appreciate is the partnership that we've had with the legislative group as it deals with numeracy. That Numeracy Counts Act, in my opinion, will make a difference. When we have a director of mathematics who's going to be working with our schools and working with our districts to improve instruction, but also the letters training. If you talk to superintendents within your districts that have teachers that have gone through the letters training, and I don't have those numbers. Do we happen to have the numbers of teachers who have gone through that?
Around 6,000, I think.
So as we have
4,400 in the first 2 cohorts.
Say again?
There were 4,400 in the first 2 cohorts.
4,400 in the first 2 cohorts.
Plus however many have signed up for the most
I think
recent
we're right
cohort.
around 6,500.
I think about 6,500.
Right around 6,500. And if you talk to superintendents and you talk to teachers, I've talked to teachers specifically, that said that this has changed what's going on in their classrooms. But remember, this is early literacy. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get to that. So the partnership that KDE is with our legislative body to work to focus on numeracy, to focus on literacy, is extremely important, and we value that, and we want to move forward with that. And we hope and we believe that as we move forward, you'll see better results as we move forward, especially in reading and mathematics. So with that being said, thank you so much for your investment. We sincerely appreciate it.
Commissioner Fletcher, we do have a few questions, but I'm going to start with my own.
Sure.
There's a lot of data to absorb in this. For anybody who's interested, you can go to education.ky.gov. There is a link to all the accountability and assessment data. I will warn you, there are over 288,000 lines of data. And if you want to print it out, it's going to take 7,463 pages. So it's important for us to know the data, but I think it's even more important for us to be able to analyze the data, and make decisions about how we can move forward. And Commissioner, after this data came out, you were quoted discussing your concerns with the science scores. I certainly share that. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to do in the Principal for Today program, Saffel Street Elementary School in Anderson County. I was in a third grade reading class, and the book they were reading and the chapter they were reading was a science book about vertebrates and invertebrates. And I know I recently read a book, The Knowledge Gap, where it talks about the importance of embedding content into our early educational things like literacy and these other things. So could you share a little bit about your concerns about science and what can we do as a state to try to improve that?
I think Associate Commissioner Sams hit that pretty directly. If you look at the assessment itself to make sure that it's that we have all the content that's being taught and being assessed in the appropriate way, but pulling in teachers to evaluate that assessment itself, to say, are we teaching exactly aligned to what the standard asks for? Now, with that being said, I think it also takes a lot of self-reflection. How do we get that professional development out to teachers to help them? How do we get out that information to them to help train teachers to the level where we want them to be? So it's going to take some time for us first to pull in teachers and pull in other groups to look at our science assessment and then evaluate where it is. And then how does that align with the instruction that's going on in the classroom? One of the things that you mentioned that I see across our state, and I think if you look at the science of reading with letters, a lot of times you're going to see districts that use, instead of seeing fantasy books all the time, which are great, we remember those books when we were growing up, but it's also great to see districts pulling out in the third and fourth grade, pulling out social studies content, pulling out science content to help teach reading. So that's embedded at a much earlier age. So again, I think it goes back to, as we look at science, how in depth are we hitting that in the elementary level to make sure that they're ready for the middle school content, then of course science. The other thing that if you want to talk about a concern that I have with science from the high school level, the science assessment really goes from an integrated approach. But if you remember, how do we typically teach science at high school? We teach biology, we teach chemistry, we teach physics. Not necessarily how are those integrated together. So that's something else that we need to take some time to analyze, especially on that high school level. Anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you did a great job, Commissioner. I do think that having some conversation around how the standards are materializing in the instruction is important. We feel we are measuring the standards in the assessment, but the question is it all triangulating together with how the instruction is occurring as well?
And we're, again, the data speaks for itself. We need to, that's one of our approaches that is moving forward, starting first with that assessment and triangulating the data, and then going from there.
I've got one more question, then I want to make a comment. It was encouraging to see that we had 8 schools that went off CSI status. Now, Commissioner, your agency does a great job. I ask for a lot of information, and they do a great job of getting that back to me. But I know we only identify CSI schools once every 3 years. When I was talking to Dr. Foster last year in a meeting, we were talking about this and some of the issues around that. And the question I asked your staff is, if we were identifying CSI schools every year, how many schools would have been identified as CSI status this year? And the list I got came up with 34 new schools. That is concerning. I'm sure it's concerning to you. But my more important question is, what resources can KDE provide to these schools who are just on the early warning list for CSI? Do you have the ability to provide resources and help under the statute and under financial restraints to help these schools before they get even further behind?
I think if you were to talk to Dr. Foster, the first thing she'd say, we need more resources to help. We do keep that, I'm going to call it a warning list of those districts that, or those schools that may be declining and moving into that CSI area, to offer them those type of resources that we offer others that are already in CSI, to help them go through that turnaround process. Even though they're not identified, we're here to help. We want to make sure they offer it. Now, is it required? No. But a lot of districts will say we'll absolutely take on those resources. I believe that if we invest more money into those processes that are very evident. If you went to our school improvement summit recently, you'll see a lot of districts that presented best practices that were either in a CSI status or TSI status once upon a time, and they incorporate everything from MTSS processes to PLC processes. And when I say MTSS, I'm talking about your tiered intervention systems, your multi-tiered support systems. So and a lot of times you'll hear that as response intervention too. It'll be sometimes used in synonymous things. But again, if we had more resources to make sure that we spread that into more districts, I think it would be very helpful.
And thank you. I just want to make a comment. I've gone through a lot of this data already, and I noticed one elementary school in particular. I'm not going to mention names right now, but I want to share their data. And this particular elementary school, I've been told, has 80% free and reduced lunch. So you understand the economic status of those students. This elementary school had proficient and distinguished numbers of 77%, 38 and proficient, 40 distinguished. They had 71% of their students who were proficient or distinguished in math. It did not give the number, but they had a score of 82.7 in science. And I understand that's a pretty good science score.
Absolutely.
Their social studies percentage was 65%. Their combined for all was 65%. But here's the one thing under the combined that really caught my eye. In this report, they give a separate score for the students who are considered economically disadvantaged and those students who are non-economically disadvantaged. This school had a higher score for economically disadvantaged students than they did non-economically status students, 65% and 64%, but I want to break that down even further. Of the economically disadvantaged students, 16% were proficient and 49% were distinguished. Whereas the 64% non-economic status was 45% proficient and 18% distinguished. Now, if Representative Truitt can get those kind of results at McKee Elementary, what's preventing us from replicating that across the state, Commissioner? What are the things we need to be looking at? Because I'll make this point to point out it can be done.
Absolutely.
So if you want to comment on that,
I would love to.
Or if Representative Truitt wants to add anything, he'd be welcome to as well.
Well, I'm going to make a comment, and Representative Truitt, you can correct me if you so desire, but I'd be willing to bet if I were to go to that elementary school, I would see professional learning communities where teachers are talking about data. They're looking at students. They're not labeling students. They're meeting students' needs. So they're going to have a strong professional learning community where they're working with students. I believe they'll have a strong intervention system to meet students' needs. And that's not only for those that need intervention, but also those that want enrichment. If we have students achieving at high levels, we still have a responsibility to help those students grow because we want them to be our state leaders. I'd also say that when you look at it, there's probably strong alignment with content and also assessment and also instruction. So those are the things I would say. But the one thing that I would be willing to bet, when you look at 80% free and reduced lunch, the one thing that's probably matters most in that school is relationships. And when kids have a great relationship with their teachers and have a great relationship with their administrators, they want to achieve at higher levels. And there's going to be, when you see if you're in high poverty, that's what we value most is family. And so when we look at each other as if we're family and we're going to have those strong relationships, I think that's where we're going to have our best gains is with those strong relationships, with the other supports. So to start there is making sure that we encourage all districts to have those strong relationships and then build in those other supports. So if there's anything I missed, Representative Truitt, please add.
First, Representative Truitt, please express our appreciation to your staff and their hard work. You have any comments you want to share at this time?
You hit the nail on the head when you talked about that last. We do all those things. We do the RTIs and the MTSSs and all those different things and the PLCs. All those things are important. But the most important thing, like you mentioned, is those relationships, especially for those kids who struggle at home, who are low socioeconomic status, who are high poverty. You got to love those kiddos. They'll run through a wall for you if you give them a hug, if they know they're going to get a hug. I've had kids, I had one this morning who had a fever and he had to leave. He was crying. He did not want to leave school because that's their safe place. That's where we take care of them. We teach them, and we hold every single kid accountable, no matter what your background is, no matter where you're from, no matter where you live. But I am proud of my school, and so thank you very much, Chairman.
And if I may, Representative Tipton, sure. I'm sure that Representative Truitt would have loved for anyone to visit his school. And that's the other thing that we encourage. And when we have districts that are similar or schools that are similar, we encourage and try to set up those supports so they can visit each other and learn from each other. And then, again, just that relationship is so much. And just please notice that he's not only meeting when I say he, your staff, and thank you for that, they're not only meeting their educational needs, but they're also meeting their physical needs. How many of those kids come to get a full meal? I've worked in a lot of high poverty areas, and a lot of times that backpack that they took home on Friday meant just as much as the math they learned on Monday morning, if not more. So once you meet those needs, it paves the way into that increased educational setting. And again, based on relationships. So thank you for that.
Okay. We do have several questions. Representative
Yes, sir.
Bojanowski.
Thank you. So first, a celebration. I finished my letters training in August, so yay. And then a comment. So there are some discussions in academia or between scholars that NAEP proficient, which is nothing like proficient or grade level, that NAEP may be better explained by looking at basic and moving from. So be very cautious in thinking about NAEP and understanding some of the dynamics there. My question is back to the change indicators. So do you have to have changed from like very low to low to be considered change, or is it based on like scale scores, a percentage of change or a specific of change? So like what
Sure.
distinguishes a change?
Everything, even though there are labels, there's descriptive words, there's a number behind everything. It's a numeric system. And so when you look at very low to very high, and remember there's a category in the middle, a maintenance, maintained. I'm trying to think off the top of my head the range of number that you can be maintained. I think you could drop by, was it 2?
2. Mm-hmm.
2. On your overall. But change, remember, it basically takes your status and layers another level on top of it. And so if you're not continuing to move up, then change can be a negative. It can actually show up when you combine them as pulling the overall number down a little bit. And I don't know if Jennifer, Dr. Fletcher, you'd like to add something more to that.
So the change component is a significant impact to the scores within each of the indicators. So as Associate Commissioner Rhonda said, change is sometimes positive, sometimes negative, but also can remain the same. So we brought together a group of educators in 2023 to set those standards of what defines the increased significantly, increased, maintained, decreased, and decreased significantly. So we brought together educators who looked at data and make determinations to determine what made those differences in those levels by those indicators. So it was looked at both statistically as well as from the educators on each of the indicators by each of the levels as well.
And in fact, we do produce a briefing packet that is also on the website that has about 64 pages with information and data. And at the back of that briefing packet is the cut scores. So what would be the actual value that would indicate the change? And so as we did from our memories, maintained is you could go down by 2 or be the same. Significantly increase, you had to improve by 7. Decline significantly, you had to go down by 6.1. So there's a range, but there's actually a number there. And so those cut scores, if you wanted to dig deeper into a particular school's data or district, those will be helpful to take a look at around change.
And those vary by level and by indicator as well.
Next is Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, and Rhonda and Jennifer for being here. I thank you for your accessibility to me as we've been working on EL and some different things, but you've always been very helpful, and I truly appreciate that. I guess as a career educator, I'm concerned about why we use change versus growth. Change, am I seeing this right? Change is what this year's class, 4th grade class, does compared to last year's 4th grade class. You know, to me, that's comparing apples to oranges. And growth, if we compared this year's 4th grade, what they did at the beginning of the year and what they did at the end of the year, would be growth. To me, that would be a better indicator of how that teacher did in that classroom during that school year. Than we all know, if you've been in education, there are certain years you have really good classes academically, and there's certain years you have really bad classes. So to me, it's not growth does not seem to be the ideal indicator that we need to be using. Change does not seem to be the indicator we need to be using, maybe growth, where you are comparing apples to apples. Your comments.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I'll say amen. First and foremost, one of the things that, and several of you in the room have been part of our looking at a new accountability system. And part of that accountability system is getting input from educators, from parents, from everything from superintendents to business leaders. And one of the strongest pieces of data is we need to look at student growth. And to me, a successful school is this: where did you get the student and where did you take them? Whereas, just as you put it so correctly, is change really looks at a cohort of this year's students versus a cohort of last year's students. And then you get that data at the end of the year. So if we looked at our survey data right now, the people that we've had, our first round of surveys, over 90% of the people we surveyed that answered back wanted to go to student growth. And again, when I say student growth, I'm not just talking about those students that may need remediation. I'm talking about those students that need enrichment, that we need to push. So if you got a gifted and talented student that came in reading on a 10th grade reading level as a 4th grader, we need to push that child to be a 12th grade reading level by the end of 4th grade if we can at all. But also, too, if we have a student that is in the 5th grade and they come to our school that they're reading on a 2nd grade level and they increased all the way up to the 4th grade in 1 year. Technically, they're still 1 grade level behind, but man, that teacher, that staff did a phenomenal job of growing that student 2 years of work in 1 year. So to me, that's a successful school. So to reiterate, what we're going to lobby to I'm sure as we look together putting our new accountability system, one of the things that it looks like we're going towards will be asking you, can we move to student growth versus a change element? So please, you'll see that as we move forward.
That's awesome, and let us know what we can do to help make that change. Last thing is the EL students, and Rhonda and Jennifer have been there with me, and Commissioner, you too, but I met with Superintendent Clayton in Warren County Schools about 2 weeks ago. Right now, they're at 33% EL students. That means English is not their first language. We have 18,000 students in Warren County Public Schools, and 33% of them now are EL students. They get a pass on that test the first year, but starting in year 2, whether they can read, speak English, read English, whatever, they're tested. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine what most of them score is going to be. So I still want us to beat that drum, find some way. I know part of it's federal, but I still want us to find a better way to evaluate EL students instead of holding our, everybody throws those statistics that our reading scores are terrible. Well, if you can't read English, you can't speak English, it's pretty hard to score good on that test. So we need to find some way, and again, growth maybe, where they start, where they finish, would be a more appropriate way to do EL student testing as well. So just keep that in mind as we go forward also.
And the comment I'll make to that is, if you look at if we have a student that comes in the 8th grade and doesn't speak English, how fair is that to the student to, after 1 year, to try to put 8th grade content? And in reading, that's almost impossible. So we're really looking at, we need kindergarten teachers, and when I say kindergarten, I'm talking about teachers that are trained to teach reading, to teach 8th grade, and have those ELL students in those type of settings. And something that maybe you haven't heard and maybe you have, if you look at Warren County alone, they speak over 120 different languages within that school system, between Bowling Green Independent and also Warren County. And I think I think Jefferson's over 140. So am I correct in that, Representative Tipton?
Yes.
Thank you. So if you look at those numbers, how are we better serving those students' needs? It's not by giving them the 8th grade test, although, and as an 8th grade, although we are kind of bound by some from some federal requirements. And we're doing our best to how do we address that. The last thing I'll say, if it pleases, that there are some just phenomenal things going on in those districts to meet those needs. They have different academies that they're working with students' needs when they come in, both Jefferson and Warren and surrounding areas. So very pleased with the work. They're basically just setting aside, okay, we understand what accountability is, but we want to meet our kids' needs. So I'm very thankful for that. Okay.
We have 9 more members who would like to ask questions, so we have more agenda items, so please keep it limited to 1 and keep your question concise. Representative Truitt.
Thank you, guys. I love the data. That's my strong suit. I love it. I love the spreadsheet that we get. It's awesome. So, Commissioner Fletcher, I'm going to put you on the spot. All right. I want you to try to, obviously we throw around that word proficiency a lot. I'm going to ask a question I've asked numerous times, but I'm going to put you on the spot because I don't think I've asked you before. All right. I want you to explain, pretend that we are kindergartners or first graders. And I want you to explain to me and my colleagues what the word proficiency actually means.
Can I give you the answer I wish it was?
Sure.
I think we need to look more about grade level equivalence. Because if you talk to someone in an elementary, anybody, if their child is on the 4th grade, and they're reading on the 4th grade reading level, they understand what that means. But now if we want to define proficiency, then you're looking at comparing as a student answering questions at a proficient level based on the grade level content standards. I think we'd be better served if we were to define proficiency as what is the grade level equivalent. Is grade level equivalent within a half a year of where the student is at one point, or is it not? So when it comes to proficiency, putting it down to brass tacks, are the students meeting the standards as it relates to the grade level content they were teaching. Whereas I would prefer to say, where are you are you on grade level? And again, we could argue where that dial would be, but I really believe we need to move back to a grade level equivalency as it relates to proficiency.
So would that be above average or below average or average proficiency?
Again, for me, I would say slightly above average. When I say slightly above, maybe if you want to look at percentile ranks, maybe in that 70th percentile, 60th, 70th percentile. We don't want to lower any standards, but on the other hand, we want to make sure that we are given an accurate measure of where our students are, and that's something that our parents can understand, and also make those decisions based on that.
I agree completely. 60, 70 percentile, somewhere in that range, which is above average.
Yes, sir.
Sometimes quite a bit above average. Mm-hmm. So it's real easy for me to find something negative in all this data I've seen. But I want to focus on something positive, or you could make it very positive. In Kentucky, 47% of our students are proficient or distinguished. So that would mean that 47, almost half of our kids are above average. Some of them significantly above average, correct? So I think sometimes we get confused thinking that's a negative thing. Proficiency is great, but for some kids, proficiency may not be attainable. You know, it may be a kid that's, you know, that can't speak English like Representative Jackson was talking about. But thank you for clarifying that. I want to keep hounding that, you know, proficiency is something that is above average. In everything you look at, it's above average. So thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Senator Higdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know it's a federal requirement that the bottom 5% of schools are rated as, used to be failing. We changed that. I guess that it was No Child Left Behind. They were failing schools, and I guess ESSA changed that to the CSI. But wouldn't it be I'm always intrigued by why we just do 5% of schools, and so we always have failing schools, or always have schools that are, we count as not where they should be. You know, it would be a much better program, I think, if we had a benchmark of proficiency or something of that nature where schools could strive to get there. Under our current system, we just strive to be not in the bottom 5%. It seems to me. Now, that's an odd way of putting it, but there's a celebration to be had if your school is not in that bottom 5%, where, like I said, I think we should strive for something higher. And what would, I guess the question with all that said, what would it look like if you had a benchmark of proficiency? How many schools would fall below that benchmark in Kentucky?
Well, if you want to talk about below proficiency, you want 47% were proficient or better, so that'd be 53% that were below if you look at those numbers. But I do want to go back to a point that you made, Senator Higdon, and I agree wholeheartedly with. Schools perform so much better when you know what the bar is. You know, this is the bar, let's set it and move forward with it. Because just as you pointed out so eloquently, there's always going to be a bottom 5%. But what if we're achieving above the bar, and maybe we need to look at how we compete nationally. We're not going to shy away from that. We always want to make sure that we're competing at high levels compared to other states. So if we set that bar, and then there's going to be a standard setting process of where that bar is, and then once we achieve that bar, let's leave it there until we get people, for a period of time so they know what the bar is. And I'm not just talking about the bottom 5%. I'm talking about the bar above proficiency. Let's set that bar also. And then let people say, okay, this is the bar. We want to move above it. But that bar may have to change depending on how we compare with others nationally. So that bar may change, but we need to keep the bar for maybe 5, 6, 7 years so people know what to strive for. I'm never about lowering the bar. Even if nationally you look at test scores drop nationally, I don't want to lower the bar. But we do want to make sure that we compare not only favorably but better than the rest of the United States.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Senator Funky Fromeyer.
Thank you. Senator Higdon and Representative Jackson, I think we're very specific about that growth metric. But in my Senate district that I represent, I have such a variety of rural all the way to urban. And when we're talking about the proficiency, there are so many children being left behind. So I'm very concerned about that metric that is student by student, so that we're recognizing that student and how we can support you. So if you can be as specific as possible, how can we support you to get this growth metric in place? And then communicate in our districts that we expect the parents, whoever is parenting that child, whether it's Aunt Shelley or grandma or mom and dad, but we expect the parents to show up because this truancy is killing many students in my area's future earnings potential. We're struggling. We have some really tough numbers, and these growth numbers aren't there. So what can we do to help you?
Well, first and foremost, if we want to look at implementing, we'll come to you, hopefully, once we go through our process maybe in the spring to look at the next accountability model that will emphasize growth, or at least that's what our data is showing. That's where we're going to emphasize growth. So first and foremost, how do you support that model? The other thing is continue the investment in letters and numeracy, and continue that investment in numeracy. There was a rather large amount of money that was put into it, and you, again, Representative Bojanowski, I think she can attest to what the letters training is like and how difficult and how intense it was and what a difference that makes. Those are the type of things that we need to continue to invest in. How do we make help our teachers? How do we equip them to meet students' needs? So when it comes to investments in numeracy, investments in literacy, we thank you for the investment so far, but continue those investments. And then also expect results. Don't just give us money. Let us show you results afterwards. And I hope that in 2 or 3 years, when we start looking at this data, it's going to show you that investment you're getting a return on investment. So those are 2 areas that I would highly suggest. And also, too, high quality instructional resources. If a lot of times somebody say textbook money is what some people would say, but that's a different time. When we look at high-quality instructional resources, we want to make sure every single district has that opportunity to access high-quality instructional resources. And we've done a lot of work within our OTL, Office of Teaching and Learning, to make sure that we identify those type of resources for districts. So as far as helping, if there was funding to districts as it relates to making sure those high-quality instructional resources are accessible to all kids, that would be another way. Those are 3 areas I could say right off the top of my head. I could give you some more, but those are 3 that I would strongly suggest, please. Thank you.
Next is Representative Massaroni.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. My question is about the high school graduation rates and how that is tied into the formula that you use. I have talked to several professors. My husband's a college professor, and they are having students come in my area that are having to take 2 to 3 semesters of pre-English because they can't pass English 101. Mm-hmm. But yet we have a 98% graduation rate. Are we sending these kids, are we graduating them just to graduate them, to get them graduated, or are we actually preparing them? Because the more I talk to some of the colleges, they're having to create more classes just to get these kids into basic English and math.
I'm going to share a story with you very quickly. I know we got a little bit of time. My very first day as principal in a district, I had a parent to call me and say, Mr. Fletcher at the time, I want you to know my child graduated from your high school. And I said, that's great. That's awesome. And she said, he can't read. First day of work. So that's where, as a principal, as a school leader, it's up to me to say, okay, what are we doing inside of our schools? I'm going to tell you that I believe that a majority, if not most, a large majority of our districts really support making sure that students are where they need to be when they move on. Now, I can't answer individual districts or individual schools, but I can tell you that of the ones I've visited, I think they've put such an emphasis on transition readiness to make sure that kids are ready for their career ready, the industry certifications, also having dual credit classes and those of that nature. I'd like to say absolutely it doesn't happen, but I can't say that with all. I'm under oath, so I can't say that happens for all. I will say with the districts I've interacted with so far, I feel very comfortable with their graduation rate and the work that they've done.
And how is that graduation rate used to?
I think it's 5%.
6%.
6%. Thank you.
Okay.
It's 6% of the overall accountability rating. When it's averaged in numerically, it's 6% of the overall. You're very welcome.
Next, Representative Josh Callaway. Okay, very good. Next, Representative Rollins.
Thank you, Chairman Tipton. On the charts that you provided us, it's disturbing to see how the rates, literacy proficiency rates in math and science went up from about the year 2000 to the year 2015. And then since then, they've declined. So have you taken a look back at those years of success and find out what they were doing that was right as compared to what is going on now, and the reason around that time period of 2015, what happened?
Well, I think that if you look at the trend data, and I hate pointing back to COVID, and I understand you're going all the way back to 2015. Right. I understand that. But if you look at some of we're still trying to survive COVID, and not only survive but thrive afterwards. I believe that we're taking the right steps when we look at the science of reading and making sure that we have those type of investments. I don't have all the answers of what was happening before. I mean, I could look at 33% of the students in Warren County are now English language learners, but I can't tell you for certain. That would be a reason. But I do believe that if you look at the preparation of our staff members that are coming in, making sure that everyone that comes in has a high quality of are ready to teach reading. Again, I don't have data on that, but again, Rhonda, is there anything that maybe you could have from previous that would add to that?
Not really. We can go back. It's a great question. We can go back and.
It's a different test too, correct?
Right. Standards have changed. The systems have changed. What we use to identify for accountability has changed. Certainly, funding across time has changed. I think we need to kind of go back and dig a little bit into that data off the top of my head.
I appreciate that.
I will tell you this, Representative Rawlings, you're correct. We need to do better. And that's one of the things, again, with the partnerships that we're working with, and I'm going to go back to the high-quality instructional resources. I'm going to go back to the numeracy. I'm going to go back to the work that this body and your colleagues have invested into our education system. I think is going to make that positive trajectory. But absolutely, we'll go back and look into some other issues that may be around 2015.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Wilner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for your work and for the great presentation. I was so happy to hear that conversation about McKee Elementary School, and I was so happy to hear you and Rep. Truitt talk about the importance of relationships. And you didn't use the term sense of belonging, but I think that's what we're talking about. If kids know that there's a place for me here, and I just, they're going to be more successful, right? And we see that in data over and over again. And I wonder if KDE looks at all at the overlay between like school climate and culture and the success of schools on these performance tests. And I wonder if there's a way to incorporate climate and culture or sense of belonging into the assessment process, and if you think that would be a positive move.
We have the survey data that's part of the culture and climate and school safety that, again, different percentages at different groups, but that is a part of the accountability model. But also, too, the data that we're getting back from our educators also talks about this idea of local accountability. Okay, we're going to work hard to work on numeracy, literacy, all the things that we feel like our kids have to have the foundational skills to be successful. But also, what exactly is going on in a district that maybe they have students that are a large number of students that are taking advanced coursework? Why is that happening? That's something that should be celebrated. As a matter of fact, you have a lot of districts that are looking at local accountability models, and I'll share one in particular. They use student well-being. They also look at their state accountability, their local accountability. When I say local, I'm talking about their interim tests that they take. But one of the measures that they have for their success that they get out to their community is student well-being. And they define that as student attendance. They also define that as what percentage of our students are involved in co-curricular and extracurricular activities. Because if you look at post-secondary success, and some of the data will point to you, dual credit, more kids take dual credit, they're going to have a better likelihood of being successful in the next level. But also, too, if they're involved in something other than what's going on in the classroom, they're also going to be successful because they have buy-in, they have belonging. So that student well-being, I think, is such a great measure, and I'll shout out to Logan County, but there's other districts that have those type of measures, too. So how do we encourage kids to be involved, to be good collaborators? How do we to be good communicators, lifelong learners, and have those vibrant learning experiences that we want to see with all of our kids? Again, we firmly believe they have to have strong foundational skills of math, reading. We want to make sure that they have the transition readiness. We want 100% transition ready for our kids. We want our students to have high graduation rates, but we want to make sure it's quality graduation rates. Make sure it's quality of the reason when they get their diploma, it means it's quality. And I'm going to say most of our districts have that, if not 99%. But on the other hand, too, how do we make sure that they're going to be successful the next level and then incorporate that into an accountability model? So those are things that I'm so proud of our districts for looking at those type of things. And I'm so proud of our districts for valuing those relationships, too.
Thank you so much. Could I just briefly comment?
Very, very briefly.
Very, very briefly. I think sometimes we talk about, learning reading and math, learning to be literate, graduating, getting high tests on scores, and then the well-being factors, the sense of belonging, the engagement in ways that are going to help them to be successful as like totally separate spheres. We should just be teaching reading and math and forget about this nonsense. But these, the sense of belonging, the social emotional learning piece of it is integral. They're not separate spheres. And so I appreciate your examples of the local districts that are using these models, and I hope we can see more of that in the state model as well. So,
if I may.
Very, very quickly.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner.
My son was a welder, and if you were to ask him to take the ACT again, whenever he took it, he said, Dad, I took it serious one time. I said, when was that? He said, when it was for accountability, because that's your job. I said, okay, thanks, son. But on the other hand, if you gave him a welding manual, he could read the technical part of that with ease. He may have not had the highest ACT reading score, but he could go through and look at that technical model and explain it back to you because it was relevant. And so that's when you talk about belonging, when school is relevant for kids and you're hitting them exactly where they are and where they want to be, that's going to be one of our best tools for chronic absenteeism, along with relationships. I'm going to go back to that. But that belonging is so important to have kids be successful in that next area.
Okay. Final question comes from Representative Rayburn.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I've got just one question. On page 4, if in the red category, that is the lowest performing schools. Blue category, that's the highest. I'd noticed under elementary, it appears that number doubled. Do we know where that shortfall is coming from? Any specifics on that?
I think that if you look at the change element is, and if you talk to districts, if you had a high increase one year, it's hard to maintain that the next year. So if you had let's say you had a 10-point increase one year, and then that doubles to give you essentially a 20-point overall indicator score of some sort, or however those interplay, but that change element makes such a difference in year to year. And to me, that makes the system very volatile. As opposed to looking at individual student growth, where did you get the child and where did you take them, that would be more consistent to me as opposed to looking at if you went up 5 points versus down 5 points in the other. So one of the largest contributors to that volatility is going to be the change element.
And one place that you can kind of see the difference is if you're looking at particular schools in your districts you represent. If you look at status last year and status this year and drop out the change, you'll see just how that comparison is without change being in it. But I think that what you're seeing there in the difference of color is mainly a reflection of change in the system.
Because change isn't always positive, it doesn't always increase, and it's not always linear as well. You may be going up overall, but you have a jaggedness of that.
Sure.
And they're just like students, they may do really well one year and not so have such a great year the next. So there's a human element to that change component, but it's the change component at that elementary school.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fletcher, thank you all for being here today. Don't run off, Commissioner. But we've got some folks who have traveled a long way to be with us today. So if President Pruitt and his colleagues from the Southern Regional Education Board will come up, we're going to have a discussion about artificial intelligence. We didn't print all the documents out, but if you would go to the meeting materials on the LRC website, there are a lot of supporting documentation from our universities, from KDE and others that you'll have. If you have time, please review that, learn more about this important issue. President Pruitt, if you and Ivy would just identify yourself for the record, and I'll swear you in, and then we'll proceed.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Stephen Pruitt, President of the Southern Regional Education Board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Ivy Coburn, Division Director of Education Workforce Alignment with SREB.
Okay, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
We
Okay,
do.
Please proceed.
All right. Well, it's great to be back in the bluegrass. It's always a great day to be in Kentucky. In fact, I like it so much, I'm coming back next week for another hearing, I think. But we are always glad to be here and excited to be with you. Just a couple of reminders. Well, I guess I need to find our PowerPoint here. If you have not been around SREB before, let me just give you a quick reminder that we are an interstate compact that Kentucky is one of the founding members of. We are basically considered somewhat of a quasi-state agency for you, and our job is literally to support you. We've been around for 76 years, and we work pre-K to gray. Our role is to help you guys with research, with guidance and advice, but mainly to be that group that just helps you when you need it. So we are here today. We were asked by Representative Tipton to come and share a little bit about our AI in Education Commission. So one of the ways that SREB does this is we bring together people from all 16 of our states, and we look at the research, we have conversations, and we develop recommendations and give the research about what a particular topic is. Now, Representative Tipton, do you want to make the AI joke, or would you like me to make the AI joke?
I'll leave that up to you.
Well, just to make sure we're talking right, it's the artificial intelligence. AI is not artificial insemination for you ag folks. That joke came out of our last commission meeting by Representative Tipton, which is why I was asking if he wanted to make the joke or not.
That's probably the only certification I'll ever have in AI.
Well, I don't know. So this was a big deal in that, our role is we want to respond to the things you guys are dealing with, but we also want to be able to forecast certain things. So when we see things coming down the pike, for me personally, I got tired of listening to the radio on the way into the work every day and hearing people talk about AI when it wasn't really AI what they were talking about. And in particular, there's this tension of we've got to respect it and we've got to recognize there's risk, but we also have to realize that there's great benefit that could come of it. So to start, a big deal here is about let's always start where we're going to end, and that is with workforce. We know that this is going to be a massive work disruption. We know that there are about 49% of skills that will be irrelevant just in the next year. There will be entry-level jobs eliminated. There are going to be jobs impacted, fewer jobs by 2030. Although that's fewer jobs in the current environment, because you'll actually, if you do the reading, you'll actually find that there are more jobs that will be available in AI. I was actually at Auburn University for a session this past week. I know y'all are they're coming to town. Senator West, I'm fully aware of the fact that it's going to be a rough Saturday for Auburn folks. But but one of the I actually was in a fireside chat with a gentleman who works in the AI industry, and he made a very interesting point. He said, we're not going to be replacing people, but we're going to be replacing people who can use AI. So in other words, there are going to be jobs, but if you're not able to operate in an AI environment, you're not going to be able to be employed. And that's something that we have kind of been a big proponent of since 2019 with our original report called Unprepared and Unaware, where automation and artificial intelligence were going to take a big part of where we were headed. So I'm not going to read all this to you because I will make sure that we get to the meat of everything. But basically, we created this commission. It's the biggest commission that I think we've had maybe in a long time, if not ever. We have about 68 members of this commission. And the reason we have 68 members of the commission is because we had 5 buckets that we really wanted to approach. AI is a massive issue, and we wanted to focus on education. But within education, there was this tsunami of information, some of it relevant, some of it not. But we felt like we needed to focus on 3 large buckets, being policy, instruction, and skill development. But within two of those buckets, we need to break that down further and say what's the implications for K-12 AI policy, for post-secondary AI policy. How does AI instruction look different in K-12 and post-secondary? But what's key is we do have in the design that those groups come back together, because what would be bad is if one group says, well, we want to ban AI, and the other group says, well, no, we're going to fully embrace it. So we're going to have that conversation. And then Ivy is going to talk to you in more detail in just a moment about the skill development. We can't really talk about this if we don't recognize that where we are headed as a country, where we're headed as a workforce, is going to be contingent on the ability of a person to be AI literate and to understand how to operate in an AI work environment. So just very quickly, we are about to release a first set of recommendations when it comes to policy. Normally with an SREB commission, you wait till the end and release this big book and there's all this. This is so ongoing, changing, and frankly, it's such an issue in all of our states. We've decided we're going to be releasing things as we go. We have our next commission meeting in November where they will be asked to sign off on this first set of recommendations. So just to give you a picture nationally, there are about 38 states who have released some type of guidance or there's a bill or law around AI. Here in the SREB region, you can actually get a feel here for where we are. And in Kentucky, as I have found, is usually a little bit of ahead. David Couch is in the crowd, and I'm sure David would be glad to talk to you about this too. Kentucky has also already released their guidance. We will be releasing our first set of draft considerations around 6 key areas. Targeted AI guidance for all groups from the state level to integrate AI knowledge and skills into the work that's going on in classrooms, to provide professional development for educators, to establish statewide AI networks. I know you guys have an AI task force that's going right now, but in a state like Mississippi, for instance, they have actually created a full AI network within the entire state of Mississippi. Develop and administer AI needs assessment. This is going to be a tool that we'll be releasing also hopefully right after the first of the year, where schools and institutions can take this and do an analysis of what are the needs that we have with regard to AI in our school or institution. And then develop cost models for what AI implementation looks like. Those of you who have been around me a little while, you know that I have these little sayings that I say quite often. I can already see some of you grinning. The fact is no great education idea ever died in the vision phase. So you've got to actually think about how implementation is going to go. With regard to instruction, we have had conversations in developing a document that outlines the skills needed. You're going to hear from Ivy more in a moment. A current state and other entities' guidelines for the use of AI in K-12 instruction. Interview current educators and leaders on how AI is currently being used. I know that there's been already that kind of work done in Kentucky. And then we're going to draft a guidance document around potential uses, opportunities, cautions, resources, and then stories about how this is actually being used. One of the things that will be coming out of this eventually is a set of criteria that states, districts, and schools can use on to determine when they get ready to adopt some type of AI program. They'll actually have some guidance around that. Post-secondary, we are conducting a landscape analysis of what's going on currently. We are actually meeting with the accrediting bodies to make sure that there's actually alignment between the things that we're looking at versus what they're dealing with. And actually just this week we had a representative from the University of Georgia meet with our committee to talk about what 50 nations are doing around the implementation of artificial intelligence in education. So we're taking actually a larger global view. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Ivy, who is spearheading. Actually, she's spearheading the whole thing, but this is her particular area of expertise. So, Ivy?
Thank you, Dr. Pruitt. As we're thinking through AI skill development, I want you to think about the skills needed for an AI-ready workforce. So when you had that by the numbers slide, it showed that 25% of our day-to-day tasks will be replaced by some type of automation or AI product. So think about yourself over the last month. AI is now on our phones. You hardly can get away from it. How have you used AI? It may be from scheduling yourself. It may be from doing a quick outline to get some ideas generated for a speech that you need to do. For me, in some cases, it's summarizing data, where I would upload data into a file and then ask for trends in information that used to take me hours to do, and now it's replaced by AI. So the future, I want you to start thinking, will be AI generated and human enhanced.
And that last part's really important. One of the questions we are constantly asking is, where is the human in the loop?
Mm-hmm. So with that, our students are going to have to think about what that AI tool is intended to do for them, and then also have a great understanding of the academic and subject area that they are working with to determine if that AI solution did in fact give them a correct answer or product, or what they would need to do to revise the input so that they are in tune and in fact using the solution appropriately. As we were starting with our subcommittee, we had lots and lots of discussions around use cases. So you're going to hear that from business and industry individuals. They want us to think about how the AI solution is used, because if we don't understand how it's used, then we're not going to be able to guide and really create the workforce that's ready to use these solutions in the future. So what you're seeing on the slide here is a series of examples. So when I think about an ag unit that we're actually creating for high school students in South Carolina, we are drawing back and helping them understand how they could have an entire building that is dedicated to producing fresh vegetables and produce that we would actually use to sustain our food source. And in that building, you have sensors that are being used to determine light, being used to determine the nutrient value, the growth rate of those plants, so that we are more in tune. And then an AI solution, once they're pulling in that data from the sensors, is able to correct the adjustment of the light, nutrients, to make sure that we have the best growing conditions and best product produced. So again, that's just one example that you'll see there. But a student using that product can't actually react or support that product if they don't know all of the parameters and how that actual AI solution is developed. There's actually additional ones. If you get the slide deck, there's a link below that gives you an example from each of the 16 career clusters. So when you're thinking through our discussion as a subcommittee, we wanted to think about the evolution of learning and starting that very early on. So how are we starting to expose our students so that each and every student is prepared to be a future worker? So with that, in elementary school, starting them to think along the path of what is an AI product, understanding how it works in some of those foundational pieces. In middle school, they're going to start using that more. And then high school and beyond, so high school and all levels of post-secondary, would be able to evaluate and create with AI. Now, if you notice, the subcommittee gave me lots of guidance in this graphic that you're seeing. One thing that they were adamant about is that every level, that blue stripe that you see, that is foundational. At every intersection point, we're going to talk about AI ethics and the ethical use of these solutions, so that we're starting all the way in elementary and building upon that as we scaffold up in all that we do. Now, the subcommittee had a hard time saying, okay, what is the exact skill set? They divided the skill sets for an AI-ready workforce into 3 buckets. The first bucket that you're going to see now is actually that of success skills. Now, as you're scanning this slide, this is going to look familiar to you. So those of us at the post-secondary level here in Kentucky, you're going to think about this as your graduate profile for some of your post-secondary institutes. Newly released, you had a portrait of a learner. These are some of the characteristics that I would find in Kentucky in that portrait. This goes back to those skills. In all of the literature that we reviewed as a subcommittee and as talking with our business and industry partners on the subcommittee, they came back very, very adamantly and said, Ivy, the future workforce needs to know how to communicate effectively, but they also need to know how to lead and work as a team. So as you're looking at my graphic here, the communication skills, the leadership management, they place those in order of preference. So not saying that all of those wouldn't have great value, but these are the ones that we really need to try to build in that future workforce, build into our student experiences. This next bucket really looks at how we are going to use those skills across an industry level. Now, for me, this title was a little bit quirky, but my business and industry partners came back and said, Ivy, this is the right title. So this is Industry Baseline Skills. This graphic also was intentionally selected. So as you notice, all those cogs are working together to churn each other, and they're sitting on a foundation of core academic skills. AI will not take away the need for academics. We will have to build the students' use of AI based on their understanding of English for the communication, math because there's data science throughout all of this, the science to understand how that tool is used. When you're looking at the domain knowledge there, that is what you want to go back to that use case about. So if I'm a student in an agricultural program, how is that AI product going to be specifically used in my field? Same thing with medical and so on. And then as you can start seeing, they really wanted to craft out and have conversations around AI ethics so that we can avoid some of those issues that we're seeing now with deep fakes and content that's generated that we know is not appropriate, but also talking about what is the responsible use of AI. So, because we don't want our students to be over-reliant on AI, we want to make sure that they have the right fit there, all while maintaining their personal privacy and understanding that any data that we put into a system is data that could actually expose others that we're working with. And so that data privacy piece there is very foundational. And the final bucket that you would see in our group.
Hold on before you go.
All right. Yes, sir.
Just one quick anecdote. Those of you that have known me for a while, I'm big about systems. And so connecting the things that are going on in this commission are important. So when she talks about the importance of those core academic skills, here's an example. We actually had one of our representatives from Maryland share this, where his daughter was asked to have ChatGPT write a letter to, and I can't remember who it was to, but as if it was from Abraham Lincoln. And so it puts the student into a different perspective. Now they are becoming the critical thinker of reviewing that writing. Is the syntax appropriate for the 19th century? Are things contextually accurate from the 19th century? So she's having to know history, she's having to know writing, she's having to know the skills for that. So all that content knowledge still is going to be primal, but it's now how we will use it slightly differently than what we have traditionally seen. And then when you add the even more powerful part, which is somewhat what was discussed with Commissioner Fletcher earlier about the relevance part, now we actually can start to transform education into something that people see as relevant to me to help me not live in my parents' basement when I'm older.
The final bucket is that of technical skills. Now, as you're scanning this bucket, I want you to really think about each and every student, each and every learner. This set of skills is not intended just for the programmers and the designers of the new products, but for all of our students so that they can, in fact, understand how those tools were developed and be better users of AI solutions. Now, this house that you would see has a firm foundation. That foundation already exists in your state, in your computer science K-12 framework. So when you think about that, you've got the data literacy, the programming piece. The next tier up, that's really trying to help our students understand how our devices are using language to actually make decisions. When you think about predictive text, when you think about translation, they need to understand how all of that works. And then also the computer vision. So that's where you're looking at facial recognition and image recognition as a part of the tool set. Now, those are foundational pieces by which we start to use and understand AI. AI has been around since the 1950s. It started with machine learning, where we can train our programming and sort data and help it, either assisted or unassisted. It's then progressed as we start to increase and combine bigger sets of data into the deep learning. And the newest piece that gets the most media right now is that of generative AI. And that's where we're starting to see the chat GPTs and then those different video and image creators coming through in that new set. But ultimately helping them understand the overarching umbrella of those technical skills so that they can be better in using those as they are our future workers. And finally, with our skills document, we have actually laid out what the progression could look like so we can think through what would that mean for our elementary students in that know and understand phase. So for each one of those skill sets, you would see this learning progression that then states can use to either update graduate or learner profiles and or the state computer science standards that you would have. So with your state computer science standards, yours were actually put out for review in 2018 and adopted in 2019. So many of our states across the SREB region will be updating those computer science frameworks now. Many of them already needed to do that for the digital fluency and then the cybersecurity aspects. And now this is a great opportunity to make sure that we just update for AI as well.
And I'll just end by saying, kudos for you guys going ahead and getting out ahead of this. Kids are walking into our classrooms knowing way more than any of us will probably ever know. And what we have found is there is just this tsunami of information. And this commission, which is chaired by Governor Henry McMaster in South Carolina and co-chaired by Brad Smith, who's the current president of Marshall University but the former CEO of Intuit, has really been helping us think through these issues around education. The other thing I would point out that I should have pointed out earlier is on our commission we have everything literally from governor all the way through classroom, K-12 teacher, higher ed professors. We have industries such as Humana. Y'all may have heard of Humana. Amazon, UPS. So we looked really at healthcare, logistics, and business. Intuit obviously is on there, to make sure that when we do this is not just from an educator's perspective. This is from a more global perspective that hopefully will result in a better global workforce. So with that, I'm guessing you may have some questions, Chair Tipton.
President Pruitt, thank you and Ivy for being here. A very important subject that we need to get more well versed in. We do have some members with questions. Representative Timoney.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. First, thank you for your service to Kentucky. We made mention of the year 2015. You were commissioner in 2015. So here's a data point for you all. And you continue to serve Kentucky through your role in SREB. I know that I've always been overwhelmed with information every time I go, and I always learn something new whenever you all present anything. AI for me is one of those things where I was watching Finding Nemo the other day, and there's the scene where the turtles get in that great Australian current and then they take off.
Yes.
That's what AI seems for me. I try and stay on top of a lot of the trends in education, and that's what I feel like I'm looking at with the topic of AI. I know you covered just the student side of it. I know I've heard recently about, I know teacher quality is the X factor in student learning. And I know that the amount of coaching that goes on from administrators through the either mentorship or evaluation process. I know that there's some AI models out there now that will record teachers and score them. And when they have been calibrated with humans, they're scoring eerily similar to what the humans are doing. So what you're going to be able to do is, I know some of the larger high schools in the state of Kentucky have, 150, 160 teachers that are required 3 observations per year in some cases, 5 in other cases. And you have 6 principals to do that. I mean, how can you accurately give the time required to coach and develop teachers if you have that huge workload? I see it as such a tremendous opportunity. It's also scary. I know our Secretary of State here has mentioned, Michael Adams talked about his concern for how realistic the voice sounds are from people talking about particular political issues. So I hope that wherever we go with it, there's a component where our young people get to teach their parents and their grandparents and their aunts and uncles about what to look for and really focus on the ethical piece, because I know that it's with power comes great responsibility. And this is one of those things that I'm glad you all are leading the way with, and I look forward to seeing what you all are doing moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will just say that ethics has been a key component of this from the get-go. We stand at an interesting place where there are it's easy to get wrapped up into the nefarious things that can go on with AI. And I think when we first had our first commission meeting, there was a lot of concern. But I think as it progressed, we started to see where there was real benefit to what could be. But again, the key is, where's the human in the loop? Because I'm on the board for the Center for Assessment. There are states that are looking at AI for scoring their state assessments. But what's key is there's got to be a human who's aligning, right? And of course, I think those of you who know me well know that I'm a science guy. So love the fact that y'all are asking good questions about science right now. But this is where this is also going to come in because of the thinking skill that's going to be needed to interact with AI. It's not going to be that you can memorize the 4 phases of mitosis, because I doubt any of y'all are sitting there right now wondering if you're in anaphase. The issue is going to be, can I think critically in this AI environment to make sure that the machine doesn't dominate without a human going, well, what is the ethical component of that?
Next, we have Senator Thomas.
Dr. Pruitt, it's always good to see you again.
Thank you, sir. Same here.
Yes, sir. As was indicated, we do have an AI task force going on. And I'm very interested in your recommendations that you're going to present. When will you said those recommendations will be finalized in November?
So this first set will be taken to the bigger commission in November. There will be more coming. This is just the first set.
Once finalized, could we, in Kentucky, our chairpersons are Senator Amanda Mays Bledsoe and Representative Josh Bray. Could they be given those as soon as they're finalized? Because we're going to wrap up our work in November, and we're charged with presenting some recommendations to both the House and Senate shortly thereafter before we begin session in 2025. I'd like to see those.
Absolutely. In fact, we'll send you drafts of them now.
Well, that would be appreciated.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly interested in this because at the beginning of the session, I had filed 2 bills on AI, both dealing with education, K through 12 and post-secondary. And so I think as a committee, as a task force, when we look at AI, we've got to also take into account what education is doing. So your recommendations, sent to us would be very, very valuable.
We will be happy to do that. And if you need me to make another trip to Kentucky, you won't have to twist my arm.
Well, that will be fine with me.
Next, we have Senator Williams.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Pruitt.
No, there's a new
back in the
commissioner.
day. Okay. So I'm very encouraged to hear your approach to this, and that it seems like if we're going to sell software these days, or we're going to buy software, it's got to have AI in the marketing literature, or you're not going to buy it or sell it regardless. And what I'm hoping that we emphasize in this, I'm going to give a few artificial synonyms, which is unnatural, strained, mock, fake, false, mechanical, simulated, pseudo, affected, and exaggerated are the top 4 synonyms for it. But what I hope we do is that we have actual instructors teaching actual intelligence, because that's what we need to do if we're going to evaluate what's artificial and real. And every generation, there's a buzzword that comes around, and you got to have it. Now, it provides great benefits, but also there's a lot of wasted money chasing the buzzword instead of the results. And I'm looking forward to seeing your results and working with this committee.
So I'll add another one to your list. There's a real thing called an AI hallucination. That's a real thing. One of the reasons why I felt it was important for SREB to tackle this was we know that vendors are making the rounds. We know that you guys are probably having people on your call sheets and on your appointments saying, you just go with us. We can do everything you need to do. And what we wanted to do is, not be for or against any vendor, but at the same time say, well, let's educate ourselves on what we actually are looking for. Because you're absolutely right. If you just look for AI, education's history is littered with lots of spent money on things that didn't matter because it had the buzzword. But at the end of the day, to me, the question of where's the human in the loop, which gets to how you're programming, but also it's what was the goal of the purchase? If the goal of the purchase was just to get AI, well, congratulations, call in the dogs and put out the fire, But if the issue is you want to do this, and our stance is don't buy anything until you identify what is that goal that you're purchasing materials for. I think that AI has great potential to do great things for education. I kept having my post-secondary people give me job descriptions, and they can be a little loquacious when they write. And I said, well, let's just put it in ChatGPT and have them summarize it. It's the best job descriptions we've ever written at SREB. But you've got to still have that goal of why are we doing this in the beginning. And right now, frankly, it's one of my biggest concerns is across the South and the country. Well, put it this way. When we announced the commission, and I'm not exaggerating, I had 78 emails within 3 hours of the press release from vendors saying, hey, we can come help you do that. I'm like, no, you can't, because we're not going to have vendors in that meeting, but we will eventually bring people to the table. So thank you.
Good. Our final questions from Representative Massaroni. Representative Massaroni, could you turn your microphone on, please?
How do we ensure we have the free speech component to AI? We've seen instances where it could work against free speech and our rights. So how do we ensure that? Do we need to work with other agencies to do that, or is that something that you guys are looking at?
Well, I think part of the conversation we're going to have in policy is around the ethical use of it. To be perfectly honest, I think the question you're asking is a much bigger one that really deals with the cooperations between legislative and executive branches, between agencies, and hopefully at some point maybe a renewed commitment to what truth is. That sounds a little altruistic, but the whole idea of we value free speech, that's a right guaranteed us in the Constitution. But I think that often goes into the eye of the beholder. Our role is what are the ethical implications of? But I think each state and locality are going to have to figure out sort of their own rules for responsible use of AI.
I think it goes back to the core academic skills. Yeah. Making sure that our students understand what that free speech means, what it means to them as an individual, and how they support others' right to free speech. And then as we're looking at an AI solution in the industry baseline area, how am I responsible in my use with that? So this slide, to me, when you brought up that question, I thought of this slide because that foundation has to be there so they understand why it's so important and how to safeguard it for themselves and others that they serve, all while being responsible and ethical. So at one point, we had a business and industry partner that said, Ivy, you only have AI ethics on our skills, and they need to also have responsible AI, so that we really understand that while it's cool that I can go make a video of Dr. Pruitt maybe singing me happy birthday with special lyrics about how much he loves me.
I'm not sure if it was actually my voice, if that would be so helpful. But
responsible or ethical. So just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should. And really helping our students understand and filter that it goes back to being a really great individual, a great human with integrity. And that, to me, is what this slide brings up with those turning wheels.
And I would just add, as I'm sitting here listening to Ivy, it is incumbent on everybody, I think, to have the conversations around AI and its ethical use. We had this kind of interesting debate that happened in one of our commission meetings where one of our commission members was comparing the use of calculators to AI. Now you're going, what's this got to do with free speech? Trust me, I'll get there. The issue was, and I know what they were meaning. What they meant was when calculators came out, math teachers said, kids will never learn math again. Well, we know that's not what happened. They had to learn math differently. But we had a professor from the University of Florida go, that's a terrible analogy. And we were like, and you kind of let her go when she says something she wants to go. And her point that she ultimately ended up making was, with a calculator, you can put bad information in and you still get bad information out. With generative AI, that's a whole other kettle of fish. Because now you're looking at, you could put some garbage in, but because generative AI has access to all of the World Wide Web with all of its biases, you actually can't make that analogy because it's actually more disruptive than the calculator ever considered being. So when it comes to the issues of free speech, it's going to be a conversation people need to have around how do we approach this, because it does. I mean, I just hope that if somebody does make a video of me singing, that I sound, a little bit more like, someone that can actually sing than I am, So yeah, I mean, these are going to be intricate conversations that have to go on. This is probably going to be our longest commission. We anticipate going another 18 months. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure we'll be finished then, because then we'll probably have to go into revisions. But this will be an ongoing thing. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing for education for the future. But it's going to have growing pains, and it's going to have a lot of hiccups.
Thank you. I just find it kind of scary if universities get to decide what free speech is and the perimeters on it. But thank you.
President Pruitt, Ivy, thank you for coming up today and sharing with us. That's our final question, so we'll move on to our next agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all.
Commissioner Fletcher, if you could be headed back up, we're going to talk about the Kentucky Educator Placement Service. You're already sworn in, Commissioner, so just go ahead and we know who you are and start your presentation, sir.
Well, I'll have my gentlemen here with me to introduce themselves, and then we'll go forward.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Todd Davis. I'm the director of the Division of Educator Preparation and Certification in the Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness.
I'm Brian Perry. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the department.
All right. Thank you, Chair Tipton. One of the things I want to preface this by saying I think it's one of the goals that we have at KDE is we want to make sure we get you the best data possible so you can make the best decision for kids and for our educators. So as part of statute, though, we do have to provide information on the Kentucky Educator Placement Service data. And you got a report, LRC was sent a report on October 1st that was based on KEPS data. As you see here is what we call it. And it's by KRS 160.152 Section 7, we have to give you that report on KEPS by October 1st. But there are some issues with KEPS. And if you on the next one, please. One of the things that with KRS 382B, superintendents are required to post district vacancies to the statewide job posting system 15 days before the position shall be filled. Notice we talk about postings here. These are job postings. Now, once it's filled, it's not required for a district to come back and take that posting off. So the data that you get from KEPS may not be the best data. As a matter of fact, we wanted to find a way to get you better data. So what we did is we surveyed all of the districts across the state. And again, some of the limitations here, when you look at the discrepancies between postings and actual vacancies. So when you see a posting on KEPS, that doesn't necessarily mean there's a vacancy for the same position. So keep that in mind. And again, that led us to putting out a survey. And we did a Kentucky Educator Shortage Survey results. And one thing I want you to note is there's 717 elementary schools. That's going to be very important that you keep this in perspective as we go forward. 319 middle schools and 228 high schools. So keep that in mind as you look at this data. Last year, if you look at vacancies, there were 593 certified vacancies that remained open all year. And again, this is from data that we received from districts. There were 92 licensed staff. And when you talk about licensed staff, I do have that list here for you. And just so that we're all on the same page, we're talking about school psychologists, school mental health, social workers, speech pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and so on. But we also have 849 classified openings that remained for the entire year. Now let me explain the percentage very quickly. The 593 represents 11% of all the total postings. So of all the postings that were done last year, 593 or 11% of those remained open all year. Whereas when you talk about the licensed staff, the more specialized people, when you talk about school psychologists, also physical therapists, occupational therapists, there were 92, but that's 20% of all the postings in that area. Then, of course, also classified staff. We thought it was important to include this type of information for you also. But 849 postings, that could be a bus driver, that could be a instructional assistant, it could be a bus monitor. All those classified staff members could be a cafeteria worker. So 849 stayed open all year, and that's 14% of all the total openings. And I hope that you're already seeing we're giving you better data than what you're used to with KEPS. The other thing that I wanted you to notice, too, is when you combine post-certified, classified, and licensed staff members, we had 3 districts that still had more than 75 vacancies last year that weren't filled. 571 to 75, there were 2 districts. 15 districts from 26 to 50, 37 districts, 11 to 25. And then when you start this school year, this is how many districts had this many vacancies on average. There was only 1 district that had every single position filled, and it was one of our smaller districts. I think it was Science Hill, as a matter of fact. Next one. I want to take an opportunity just for a second, if you will, to thank every single district in the state of Kentucky answered our survey. There was a lot of work that was put into this. But also to thank the staff at KDE for working on this. Also from our Office of OELE, Office of Educational Licensure and Effectiveness, also with Brian Perry. Actually, my secretary was on calling people. I was texting people. We wanted to make sure we got this data and help people to answer that. But 100% of our districts is giving us this data so we can present to you. Again, there's only 1. So if you look at our classified support as of September 1st, there were 1,766 classified positions open as of September 1st. And we selected September 1st because you've done all your efforts to try to make sure you have all the positions in place before school has started. So by September 1st, you're more than likely that this is what you're looking at for a long period of time. Hopefully it'll be filled. But also when you talk about 447 licensed educator positions vacant, and I talked about what those were earlier, 363 special education, 889 general teaching positions, and school-level administrative positions vacant as of 9/1/24. There's one other statistics I want to put out there. If you looked at the KEPS data and looked at the posted vacancies versus what was filled vacancies according to KEPS, there was nearly 3,000 openings, certified openings. But if you look at our data, there's 1,763, I think, because this takes care of those postings that weren't removed. So again, I'm trying to give you the best data possible. Now, here's some other numbers. Again, keep in mind 717 elementary schools, 319 middle schools, 228 high schools. So as of September 1st, we're still looking at 354 elementary school teachers. Now, please don't think that there's an open classroom. We're going to talk to you a little bit about how districts are taking care of that. But we have 139, if you look at special areas, middle school science, then all the way through down to foreign language. But now again, keep in mind we only have 228 high schools versus 717 elementary schools. So you can look at this data, and again, we feel this is much better data than what you're going to see with KEPS. But we also felt like we did part of the survey, we wanted to ask reasons why. What were the mitigation strategies that districts are using? When you look at all these openings, you have most of them are utilizing substitute teachers while others are utilizing retired teachers. Then also to increasing class size. If you look at some of the data when we talk about teacher retention, of course, teacher salaries comes up, but also you look at the working conditions. So districts are compensating and trying to make sure that they address those missing classrooms, those classrooms that are not covered with teachers, by increasing class sizes, which makes it very difficult to meet the individual needs of students. In some cases, they're eliminating courses. We do not want to eliminate opportunities for our kids, but when you don't have the teachers in the classroom, that's one of the things that we have to do within our classes. They're combining classes. We've talked to some administrators themselves that are covering classes themselves and teaching classes. Kudos to administrators that are taking that on too, because being an administrator is tough enough, but also to teach classes is phenomenal. And also you have the reducing or eliminating teacher planning. That happens a lot, especially when you have absences. There's a lot of times when that teacher planning is utilized because we need to make sure students are covered. But also, too, this is another mitigation strategy that's being used by districts to compensate for all those missing teachers that we have in the classroom. So you see this data, how are we addressing that when we talk to schools? This is things that came directly from our school districts. Next one, please. When we talk about special education, the next area we talk about, and again, this is all districts, and I appreciate the change here. This includes JCPS and all other districts combined. There's 216 absences when it comes to special education when it comes to LBD, or learning behavior specialists. 74 MSD, 42 early childhood, 16 with the hearing impaired, and of course 14 visually impaired. So, how are districts addressing this? Next slide. They're utilizing substitute teachers, utilizing a retired teacher, but also increasing the workload of other teachers or administrators. And again, this was an open question to our school districts. What are you doing in order to address these type of issues within the classrooms? Some of the things, too, that I'd also would point out to is like outsourcing the position. How do we find other agencies that would help us to fill those type of needs? Combining classes. You'll see a lot of the same things for special education that you're going to see for regular education classes or general education classes. Sometimes we're having to increase class size. And some of the most vulnerable students that we have, we're having to increase class size. And to the point, sometimes we're increasing the course load for even a special education teacher. And again, this is directly from our school districts. Next slide, please. If we look at school level type administrative positions, you also have 34 instructional curriculum coaches that were vacant, 16 associate principals or assistant principals, and 14 principals. So going into this year, we had 14 buildings that did not have a principal hired at that point. They either had somebody from central office covering or something of that matter. Next slide, please. How they're utilizing a retired administrator. This happens a lot in our districts. We turn to the people that have retired to come back and give us that stability. And so any way that we can make that easier for our retired teachers, we'd really appreciate that. Some of them actually said when it comes to our assistant principals, there really wasn't any issue. The principal took on the workload. Instead of having an assistant principal and a principal at a building, maybe it's just one person handling both duties. So if you're taking up a lot of time working on discipline issues, you're not able to work in the classroom when it comes to instruction and instructional coaching and be there to support your teachers. Now, a lot of them also anticipate filling positions, this is one of the more common because we're talking about administration as opposed to building level teachers. They also look at increasing the workload of another faculty member. We talked about combining a principal and assistant principal together. Next slide, please. And actually, when we talk about what has the highest shortage rates among the licensed educators, I know the raw number says school psychologists, but if you look at percentage-wise, we have a larger percentage of openings with school psychologists as opposed to numbers. But if you look at speech pathology therapists, we have 44 positions that are unfilled, all the way down to social workers, physical therapists, occupational therapists. But I will say this where our data could be a little bit better, so many of our districts are outsourcing this. So maybe they didn't post that they needed a speech pathologist or a speech therapist. So, for example, in the district I worked in before, we worked a lot with Marshall University to have some of those their people to offer those services for us because we couldn't fill the position. So we were contracting with universities and others to try to get our students what they need. And you can see the other numbers there also too. Again, top one on the list is outsourcing the position. We're having to enter into contracts to make sure that our students are getting the services that they need. And that's been determined by their IEP and their ARC meetings, their Individualized Education Plan, and their Admissions Release Committee as far as ARC meetings. Sometimes the position's unfilled, and then sometimes they also anticipate filling position in the future. But again, the most common thing that we hear is outsourcing that position to others outside of teachers. Bless you. We also wanted to provide classified data to you. So when we put our survey out, we talked about how many teaching assistants that we had out, 480. And again, this is not taken because we're taking this directly from responses from our districts. Bus drivers, 339 openings that are still posted, that are not filled. Food service. Again, let's look at school resource officer, because this is where our data could be better. And when you talk about 51 postings that are not filled, or 51 openings are still there, many districts actually contract with the local authorities. They'll maybe contract with the city police or the county sheriff's office, so they don't always post the SRO. So that number can be misleading, so please keep that in mind. So many of our districts will say, instead of posting it themselves, they'll work with the local authority in order to have that SRO position. Now, we do have some schools that have taken on that their own school police department, so this is where a lot of that data would come from, is that 51. Same thing with school nurse. Many of our districts contract with other hospitals or maybe even work with their health departments. So they're not exactly the ones responsible for posting the school nurse. It may be the other organization. So those type of numbers can be misleading, so please keep that in mind as you go. What are we doing? Of course, substitute temporary staff, and you'll see this very prevalent, increasing the workload for other staff members. For example, we have several certified teachers across the state that may miss their planning period at the end of the day so they can do a bus route. And they basically have a dual, they serve as a certified teacher, but also serve as a classified bus driver. We also have some where you have to combine bus routes. That means kids are getting home later. When you have to put together, maybe one person may have to do a short bus route, come back and pick up students and take another bus route, just because we don't have enough bus drivers. So we've also seen people share staff across schools. I am so pleased with seeing the amount of support and amount of work that districts are doing together to try to address such things. And it's about trying to make sure our kids get the services they need, as opposed to a competition between districts, or among districts, I apologize. So you're looking at combining classes, increasing class sizes, and that's more along the lines when you talk about teachers' aides and things of that nature. Next slide, please. If you look at last year, going back to last year's data, again, getting this from districts, there were 246 special education. Again, please remember this is last year's data as opposed to what was September 1st. 246 in special ed, and then you could read through those numbers as we go through. Speech pathologists and school psychologists, again, wanted to provide you last year's data so you could see that. I'm not going to go through each number so you can see that. Teachers' aides, paraprofessionals had the highest unfilled vacancies among our classified, so you can see those numbers also too. And I thought this was an interesting slide, and I'll be honest, I debated on whether or not to include this, but I thought this is data that you needed to see. When we ask our district leaders, what's the quality of applicants that you're seeing? And again, this is their opinion. Our district leaders are saying that 49% of the candidates are similar in quality, whereas 42% they feel like are lower in quality. Now, I am thankful for the 9% they felt were higher quality. That's great. But if you're looking at what the 42% of lower quality, that really puts that burden onto districts to make sure that they're training teachers. And I will go back to thank the legislative body for passing the KEMP, Kentucky Educators Mentoring Program, so that we were going back to that internship, but also too like to ask the Assembly to consider funding for that too as we move forward. Next slide, please. Now, I took just a little bit of time to talk about KEPS versus the survey data. And what I wanted you to see is some options of what other states are doing. And I want to thank our OELE staff for putting this together. If you wanted real-time data, in other words, if I could pull off on October 1st, just do some type of pull from data to see what the openings are, we don't really have a good method of doing that. We could pull KEPS data, but just like I talked to you before, is that vacancies versus postings and things of that nature? Or do we need to do a survey every twice a year? How do we handle that? So, and again, getting you better data so that if we come to you and say, you know what, we have such a shortage of middle school science teachers or special education teachers, How are we going to address that through KDE, through the legislative body? That way you have that data immediately. And again, I think that's one of the things I'll praise my team at KDE. I believe that we do a good job of getting you the data as quickly as possible when you ask for it. But we want to make sure that it is valid, excellent data when you get it. So if you look at Colorado, they do have a statewide application and tracking system, but it's for their entire state government. So I give you this idea is, what if we did a uniform application system throughout the entire state? And then, so if you're in Jefferson County and you apply for a Jefferson County position and maybe you didn't fill into a position, well, maybe Murray Independent might need a teacher and could also view that same application. So that would be a statewide system. That's something that we're talking about. How do we do that moving forward? But also, too, that would get you very good data about what's opening now if we had some type of uniform system. We've also talked about, do we want to also make sure that we do the surveys? Florida has different vendors that's available, very similar to school districts. And I think we have, if you look at, I won't mention vendors here in front of you, but there's essentially 3 vendors that we've seen. 2 of the vendors actually talk with each other. Their programs talk to each other. So those are the 2 more common. You'll see some districts that use an online application system that they'll also do their evaluations through. Or it might also be their timesheets for their classified staff. So this online system has some, if we did something as far as an online application system, then maybe districts could also purchase add-ons if they wanted to do that. Next one, please. West Virginia has a single vendor system where there's a centralized posting application tracking system. It's controlled by districts, and the state does not approve the postings. So there's one there. But Georgia and South Carolina, it's kind of did what we did for you today. They have a system, but they also went through a survey to make sure they get you the correct data or get their constituents the correct data. And there were 2 recommendations that if we want to move forward and make sure that we have the best data possible, do we want to consider a statewide application system, or do we believe that this data, do we want to go through this process of doing a survey once or twice a year to make sure you have the best data possible? You know, there's issues with both. We understand that. But if you look at it, you know, you have to wait until we do the survey to make sure you get the correct data. So you did get a report on October 1st. And it's going to have a lot of information. Now, it has some very good information. I don't want to downplay that one, because there's a lot of, you'll see every single district and what postings they had, what vacancies were filled. But again, we don't know if they actually took off the filled positions and it's still posted as a unfilled position. Keep that in mind. So 2 recommended actions that we have there that we could maybe get you better data as we move forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. We do have one question. Representative Emily Callaway has a brief question.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. And I do want to thank you for the survey. I think that was most helpful to supplement the data that you gave us. So thank you for that. It must have been executed really well to get the 100% participation. So again, applauding that. I do appreciate the information. 2 concerns I have, the planning period being used. What's the expectation for that teacher who has to give the planning period? When is he or she expected to then plan? Because I feel like that's an essential part of the job. So I have a real problem with that being given up. And I'll go ahead and ask it's a second brief one regarding principals. In my district, I'm seeing a big turnover rate about principals. And one of the things that's been discussed here is a sense of belonging with the children. And the principal being there on a daily basis and then being familiar with the kids from kindergarten to 5th grade, elementary school level is important. So I really want to know maybe more data about that. I'd like to see some data about what is the turnover rate for principals. If they're going to different schools within the district, are they going outside of the district? I'd like to kind of see that and maybe get a feel if there's any kind of exit interview being done with them who are leaving, and what can we do to come alongside and support our principals. So those 2. Thank you.
I think as far as you talk about turnaround rate, that's something that we'd probably have to add to a future survey. Why did you leave the role? And a lot of times you do see, it may be an opening here, but they may have moved to a different district or a different place within. I'll go back and see what type of data we have for that turnover rate for principals. I don't think that we have something available, but I'll do our best to find that. Now, as far as the hard question when you talk about the looking at planning periods for teachers, different districts handle that differently. In some cases, some districts will say that's part of the workday, and your planning can be done afterwards. Hopefully there's some opportunities for compensation to happen, but again, that's handled differently in different districts. The best opportunity is to make sure that we don't take that planning period away from teachers. That's what I would promote. But then you're also balanced with how do you make sure that those students are supervised. I've seen schools to take students and, like, if a teacher's absent and they couldn't get a substitute teacher, just basically divide up those kids for the day and say, you're going to go, you may have one teacher teaching a social studies class and they've got 7 or 8 other students from another class in their class also too. A lot of times those are handled within teams, like an 8th grade team or a 7th grade team in middle school, things like that. But different districts handle it differently. Some of them just ask teachers to cover. I know that I did as a superintendent, but we tried to avoid that as much as possible. Hopefully there's some compensation opportunities afterwards, but again, there's no easy answer for that one. I'm sorry.
The last question will be from Representative Rayburn.
So you had mentioned sometimes there's teachers where they can't find substitutes and they'll divide the classes up. So I've had a couple of teachers in my district reach out regarding that very issue. And in a couple of my counties, it seems that there's some incentives for having those extra kids in the classroom. Do we have the data on what those incentives are based on each district? Maybe that could help some other districts think of how they can help support their teachers as well, because I know teachers are overwhelmed with lack of staff. So maybe that's an idea, or maybe you have the data.
I'd have to look to see if we have that type of data. I've seen some teachers actually decline taking some type of funding or taking some type of compensation because they felt like they took it from students. So again, I think they deserve it. Don't get me wrong. But when you talk about doing those type of incentives, it means that what's the other funding source? So if you take funding from one area and put it to another, I think they deserve it. Please know that I believe teachers deserve it. But also too, what are you taking that away from? Are you taking away from maybe instructional materials that students need? Maybe it's other things. Again, if there was a funding source to make sure that those incentives are there for a district, I strongly encourage those, and some districts do that. But again, technically it's part of the workday, but still yet it's a very important part of the workday for teachers to have that planning time. So I'll look for some data to see what other incentives are out there, and we'll try to put together a list for you.
Thank you. It'd be very interesting for the committee.
Thank you, Commissioner Fletcher. We'll continue this conversation. Members, we do have 10 administrative regulations on the agenda. You should have received an email with a link to those for your review previously. Members, no action is required. By placing the regulations on the agenda, they will go into effect upon the adjournment of this meeting unless the committee finds issues with it. Does any members have any questions about any of the administrative regs that were placed on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion to adjourn? Motion second. All those in favor say aye. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
My son does something similar in Logan. He does like does weddings, that's what that'd be interesting sports. Not the same. I don't remember if you had the key. Yeah, no. We'll retire. And I was really disappointed in turn the
I'm sorry. Well, I have to do what the director says, and she never called for it, so.
Because I did get my name.
Oh, really? As you can tell, I concentrate. Well, see, the one that would get you to that role came right there. Yeah. So that's on her. But she probably knows who you are.
Good job today.
That's hilarious.
Those two were, but 62. Looking back on that. You know, you never know. It's always those things that like I know that I'll still. And that was 5 years ago. Blood pressure still hasn't gone back to normal, but it was one of those things where.
Good. How you doing? Travel with.
Kids along, spouse along, you do a nice job keeping things going.
Oh yeah.
And I love that.
I like to travel with.
Our work is so hard, and just to have enough time with our family and make memories together.
Yeah, we going. Next thing we started to think about 2 or 3 years ago. My oldest son's a dentist. He practiced in Glasgow. He actually practiced.
We'll go to different offices.
Yeah.
That's
Well, he
really
practiced. He